McInerney family, we're all, thank you for coming today. I'm Michael Alan Zahorik, the oldest nephew of Al's. Yes, that's correct. That's me, Mom. And son of my mother, Joan Zahorik, Al's oldest sister. So I have some words I wrote about Al, a little bit of his life, and then my mom and a bunch of other people are going to have some things to say after that. So why don't I get started? Okay, so Alan Martin McInerney was born in Chicago during the summer of '42 on August 10th. He grew up in the South Shore neighborhood with his older sister Joan and brother Lee, and his younger siblings Bill, Lynne, and Tom. Al was the son of Alan and Helen McInerney. His middle name came from his grandfather Martin on his mother's side, as well as her brother Marty. And taking the lineage of the name a bit further back, Alan was originally the surname of his great-grandmother on his father's side from the county Sligo, Ireland. There is a lot of family history packed into Al's name, and that's fitting since his siblings, parents, partners, large extended family of cousins, and especially his own children and grandchildren meant everything to him.
Okay. Are you ready?
We've got people beaming in remote. All right, Al's early years were spent living in a two-flat at 7418 South Coles in the South Shore neighborhood. His cousins, the Nealis family, and their 6 children lived downstairs in a 2-bedroom. So people, Al attended St. Bride's across the street from the house until 8th grade. South Shore during that era is kind of a mythical place for me, as I've heard so many stories about the 2 families and the Loftus cousins, friends from St. Bride's and nearby Rainbow Beach. The neighborhood was full of kids and cousins, taverns, and characters. Ask anyone who grew up there if you want to hear more. And I wanted to have my mom say just a couple of stories about Al when he was young. So, Mom, do you want to use the microphone? Or?
No, it's all right?
Yeah.
Well, because I'm the oldest in the family, I'm the matriarch. And I remember my siblings when they were really little. I'm the only one that has those memories. So I'm going to tell a few about Al. When he was, maybe 4 years old, I was walking down the street with him. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was whistling a recognizable tune. He really was. Everybody was turning around to see who this is, this little kid. And it was kind of told what the future would be. He loved music his whole life. It was so important to him. He just loved it. So then the next memory I have is when he was probably about maybe 5, 6. He and his friends, this gang he had, they were in the alley looking for treasures like they always were, and they found a can of paint with the lid off of it and the paintbrush stuck in the can of paint. And they thought, oh, this is great, what are we going to do? And they looked around, they saw a car in the alley. So, guess what? They painted the car. And, all right, maybe I'm not close enough. Can you hear it now?
Yeah.
Anyway, he and his friends painted the car. And I don't think they thought there was anything wrong with it. It was just something to do. The man came out, and he must have been an angel because he didn't get mad. He just got my father, and he said, well, we can fix this. We just, get our money and we fix this. And my dad thought he was going to be sued for sure, but he just had a wonderful attitude about it. So that was the end of that. The next little adventure I remember, he probably was about maybe 11 or 12 years old. And we lived 2 blocks from Lake Michigan. It was winter time. It was freezing, really, really cold. And in those days, Lakewood looked like it was frozen all the way out to the horizon. So he and his friends decided they were going to walk across Lake Michigan. And they, they tried it. But luckily, there was a woman in a high-rise who saw them and called the police and saved them. It was it. So that's all I'm going to say about his young life.
We'll have you come up and read in a second.
Okay.
All right? Okay, continuing on with a little bit of the history of Al. So the McInerney family moved to Park Ridge early in 1956. It was so far from South Shore, it seemed like moving to another state back then. Al finished the last few months of 8th grade in Park Ridge, which worked out well as he and his younger siblings were able to make new friends before summer and high school started. Al attended Notre Dame High School in Niles and was active in the pep club, service club, and the chorus. He was a good student and stayed out of trouble, leaving that for his younger brother, Bill. He was friends with Mike Kelly, John Hines, and his best friend in high school was Fran Sheehan, who later married Barb. But before they married, Al took Barb to prom his senior year. Al and Barb reconnected later in life and spent the last 20 years together. And I'll have some words from Barb in a little bit. So Al graduated from Notre Dame in 1960 and then went to college at Loyola University in Chicago, where he received a degree in history in 1964. He lived on campus and joined a fraternity at Loyola, where he became friends with guys like Bob Sheeran and Marty O'Grady. Upon graduation, Al enrolled in the master's program at Roosevelt University, which he attended through 1966. That was also the first time the whole family went to Hawaii to visit Lee, who is now an Irish Christian brother stationed in Honolulu. Hawaii is a place that loomed large during those years for the family. Al's parents bought a condo there, and then Bill, Tom, and Lynne lived there at different points as well. After leaving Roosevelt University, Al joined the U.S. Army, where he served as a first lieutenant from 1966 to 1971. These were some of the worst years of the Vietnam War, but fortunately, he was never sent to Nam. In fact, the last story he told me a month or so ago was how he exited the Army. When Al thought his commitment was done, he was told he needed to stay another 2 years. Al told his captain, "Nope, that was not what we agreed to," and he walked out the door and never looked back. This is also a time I have some memories of the family being over at our house and the lively arguments that ensued. And I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and there were a lot of arguments. They sometimes reminded me a little bit of All in the Family. I think Al loosely played the part of Meathead for some of you guys that remember the show. But one of the things Mark remembered about it was, the beer was flowing and everything, and we were young enough to go fetch beers, and we liked to shake up the beers before we gave them to Al. So it worked about 2 times, and then the next time we brought him a beer, Al grabbed us by our head, opened the beer right in our face. We stopped doing that. So Al married Linda in November 1971 and started a family shortly afterwards. Their first daughter, Jennifer, was born in December 1972. In fact, the Summer of 42 reference was intentional at the beginning because that was the movie they saw. They had the hardest time deciding on a name, Linda told me, and Al saw the actress Jennifer O'Neill and said, "That's it. That's going to be the name." So that's where Jenny got her name. So they moved to the home where we are now. We are currently gathered in 1973. Carrie arrived shortly afterwards in April 74, and then Charlie in February 77, and Andy in August of 79. Bill and I were talking a few days ago, and he remarked he never met a guy who loved babies as much as Al did. In fact, Linda told me he was a great daddy who jumped in to help with the kids and wasn't afraid to change a diaper in an era when men couldn't always be trusted with those duties. Or at least my father couldn't be. I can assure you of that. My brother Mark remembers how much he tossed his kids up in the air, and Linda told me how he'd swing the kids so high in the backyard out here, and I can still hear the giggles from them and see the smile on Al's face. When the kids were young, the family spent a lot of time camping and particularly liked the North Woods. They often spent vacations together with Bill and Mimi's family. The kids were all close in age, and I know some of their best childhood memories are those times together. Al worked as a manufacturer's rep, taking over his father's business, and was an entrepreneur for over 35 years. He enjoyed classical music and jazz and taught himself how to play piano later in life, which is no easy feat. He was also a great whistler, a talent he first witnessed with his father and his uncle George Nealis. Those two created beautiful counterpoint harmonies when they whistled. I wish I could remember it, but the whistling I do remember throughout the family. So he was a big sports fan, starting with the Cubs and then the Bears and the Bulls, and he learned to fish from his brother Tom. He did a lot of traveling later in life, particularly on his motorcycle. Perhaps he was inspired by a ride on the back of Linda's father's motorcycle when they visited her parents in South Dakota. He enjoyed riding his bicycle when back home, photography, stargazing, and reading, especially reading. If there's one image I have of Al, it's reading a book. I was drawn to him at an early age as I was a bit of a book nerd and loved history as well. However, he was always happiest when spending time with his large and close-knit family, particularly his grandchildren, Michael, Nora, Kevin, Ryan, Gage, Owen, Myrna, Ethan, Emmett, Ellie, and Bowie. Being there to watch them all grow up and to witness the birth of Bowie is what kept him going in his final years. We've all had 3 weeks now to think about Al and our memories of him. I simply loved talking to him. He was smart and very well read. I always look forward to seeing him, especially if it was just the two of us talking. I was lucky he lived close by. I made a point of stopping by to see him most of my adult life, and sometimes he'd come by our house after a bike ride. I'd have a list in my head of the things I wanted to talk to him about: sports, politics, history, natural history, our kids, families. And I learned long ago how much he liked to debate or argue about almost anything, and I considered it a little game to not let him, where am I? Hold on. To not let him argue with me. I try to agree with him and slide to another topic or another angle on the subject. And really, for the most part, I had a similar point of view as Al, so it wasn't hard to do. Bill's got some comments a little later on Al's spirituality, but I considered him a humanist. The definition of humanism is an approach to life based on reason and our common humanity, recognizing that moral values are properly founded on human nature and experience alone. The core of his humanism was obviously all the people in his life. He really enjoyed talking to people and was never at a loss for words. Many would say he had to have the last word, but once you understood that, he was really great company. I asked Pat Ahrens recently how much time he spent talking to Al over the years. Well, no surprise, a lot. Pat loved his company and probably spent more time with him than any other male over the last 20 years. There were a couple of good columns in the New York Times this week, a paper I know he enjoyed, and I want to share a few passages I think capture Al's view of life. Allison Arif had a column titled, "Life is Short, That's the Point." She quoted a passage from the most recent book by Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote, "You can think of death bitterly or with resignation as a tragic interruption of your life and take every possible measure to postpone it, or more realistically, you can think of life as an interruption of an eternity of personal non-existence and seize it as a brief opportunity to observe and interact with the living, ever-surprising world around us." Arif continued, I was taken by Ms. Ehrenreich's formulation, this notion that our experience of life, though unique to us, is just a part of a broader continuum. Our time here is but a blip, and when we leave, the great world continues to spin. As such, the appreciation of our own lives has much to do with the ever-increasing awareness of its relative brevity. In this, an awareness and acceptance of our own mortality that makes us human. And it is the impetus, I'd argue, for living our lives to the fullest. In another column by the French philosopher Bernard Henry Levy, titled, We Are Not Born Human, Levy writes, we aren't born human, we become it. Humanity is not a form of destiny, it is a destiny. It is not a steady state delivered once and for all purposes, but a process. To be human also means knowing that one can win battles, but never the war. Death will have the final say. If this seems all too tragic, if we are troubled by the sense that the inhuman is the rule and the human the exception, we must come to understand it as a source of salvation. So one way we can become human is through stories we tell each other about each other. So today, let's all share stories about Al, laughs, and maybe a few tears. This is how we can remember Al now and forever. With that, I'd like to have my mommy had something more to read, and then we have other family members.
It's just, I don't even know what the shirt is. Several weeks ago, there was an article in the Tribune written by Mary Schmick, and it was, the title of it is, What Would We Do Without Our Brothers? And it's a long article, which I would not read, but I couldn't help thinking about that. You know, I, of course, thinking most of Alan, but all my brothers. And she said, growing up with so many brothers, all of them younger, shaped me in ways I can only guess at. I think it trained me to see boys not as some mysterious other, but as companions and sparring partners, as people I could fight with and still love, as helpers and people I could help. There are days when you need to step away from the churn of your life and take a moment to thank the people who made the effort to make your life better. Al definitely made my life better, and he was always there for me if I needed him. He was just great. And this will be short. You talked about his liking to debate and argue with people, and one time I said to him, we were going back and forth, and I said, you could be right. And he was all, what? You know, what do you mean? You mean you're not going to talk anymore? So that was 15 years ago at least. And just a couple of weeks ago, when I visited him, I don't know what we were talking about. It wasn't an argument. But he said to me, you could be right. Get out of there. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thanks, Mom. Matt's going to read some words from you, Bill, or? No, you're going to read it. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a little of this is going to be repetitious because I didn't know what Mike was going to say, but my memories begin at 7814 South Coles Avenue. Our second floor apartment had only 3 bedrooms. Mom and Dad had one near the kitchen. Joan and Lynne had the front bedroom. And Lee and Alan and I had the middle bedroom. For the first few years of his life, Tom either slept in our parents' bedroom or in a crib in the dining room. Al and I shared a twin bed next to the window above the alley. And I recall feeling so safe and comfortable when we slept together. With the windows raised, the sounds of the neighborhood were fantastic. Every 15 minutes, the church bells from St. Bride's steeple across the street would ring. and that sound was never intrusive. But best of all was the sound of the steel mills just 1 block away. The ore trains were constantly moving back and forth, dumping their loads and making very loud crashing noises. But those sounds were like music, and I missed them a lot when we moved to Park Ridge. Anyway, sharing a bed with my brother was a wonderful memory for me. Eventually, Tom had to be accommodated in the room, and that meant we got 2 sets of bunk beds. I still remember wishing we could have kept the old arrangement. And today, I'm reminded of that again whenever I go across the street and see my grandsons going to sleep. They each have their own bedroom, but I notice Noe still sleeps with me. Where are they? Another great memory from those days was building forts. We built a lot of them, usually in one of the 2 prairies, also known as vacant lots, which were on our block. In about 1954, we built a 2-story fort with scavenged and pilfered wood right next to our back porch. Al was very much involved in building that fort, along with our newest cousins and many of the neighborhood boys. That fort was actually very close to the newest porch, which was on the 1st floor. And even though we thought it was a marvel, it was actually a monstrosity. And after about a week, our Uncle George said, "Enough." So as with all our forts, we had a great time demolishing it. After we moved to Park Ridge in 1956, Al and I did not hang out or play together very much. He had his friends and I had mine, and our circles did not intersect too often. I spoke to him about this a month or so ago, and he didn't remember it being anything unusual. He was probably right about that, but I wished we could have been closer during those years. As Mike said, Al was a good student. He got good grades and rarely got in trouble. I wanted to be like him, but rarely succeeded. Another very good memory that Al and I shared recently was a weekend in Park Ridge when his cousins Terry and Philip stayed at our house. They were high school seniors at that time, and in my mind, were acting like they were on top of the world. We both remembered that weekend because it was rare for all 3 of those cousins to hang out together. Al didn't date much in high school, while Terry and Philip were wildly experienced with girls. At least they thought they were. So there was a lot of storytelling going on that weekend, and Al had a really good time with those 2. And I did too, vicariously. All 3 of them left us too soon. During the 1960s, Al and I led separate lives and rarely did anything together. We were in different colleges, and then I was in the Peace Corps, and when I got back, he was still in the Army. But one thing I recall very clearly from 1968 was a letter that I received in Somalia from him. He had been stationed at Fort Leonard Wood for a couple of years and hated everything about the place. He said he was so bored that he was thinking about volunteering for Vietnam. That letter sent me over the edge, and I wrote back to him immediately, begging him not to do it. When I reminded him about this recently, he didn't remember the letter and claimed he would have never said such a thing. But he did, and I was forever glad he didn't follow through on that one. The best thing that ever happened for our relationship is both of us getting married almost at the same time. Al met and married Linda while we still lived in Hawaii. But as soon as we came back in 1972, we started spending a lot of time with them socially. Then the babies started coming, his 4 and our 4, almost in lockstep. Mimi and Linda were close friends, and we did so many things together as couples and parents. There were many camping trips, vacations in the North Woods. Our kids were very close with their cousins, much as we were with our cousins growing up. They spent more time with us at Lake Wisconsin than anyone else, and those are precious memories to me. In fact, it's hard for me to go there without thinking of him. So just about 20 years ago, Barb Sheehan re-entered his life and brought him much needed love and companionship. That story is also interesting because it began when they were teenagers. At that time, Al and Fran Sheehan were close friends, beginning almost from the day our family arrived in Park Ridge. As high school seniors, Fran dated Barb's sister, Jackie, while Al dated Barb. In fact, one of the pictures you can see inside, right below the TV screen, is a picture of Al and Barb all dressed up for senior prom. But then Fran took interest in Barb, and they ended up getting married and staying together until his death many years later. In 1998, Al and Barb reconnected and have been together ever since. Barb's love and support changed his life for the better for the last 2 decades. One last thing I'd like to comment on about my brother Al is his character. Everyone knows he was smart and had strong opinions, but I think there is some misunderstanding about his spirituality. And some of you might laugh that I would even use that word in association with him, but that's reason enough to talk about it. Every family member attending this gathering was raised in a Catholic environment, and most of us attended Catholic schools for our entire education. In our immediate family, we 6 siblings grew up in a particularly rigid and stifling Catholic environment, and all but one of us went in different directions as adults. Al was particularly repelled by the institutional church, but I maintain that he adopted the most important lessons that the church teaches in the way he lived his life. In my 74 years as Al's brother, I never knew him to lie or steal or take credit for anything that he did not deserve. He was truly one of the most honest people I've ever known. And if the golden rule is the most important law of the Catholic religion, then the church should judge Al well. When anyone needed help, he was always there. He was generous with his time and his money and his love, as all his family and friends will attest. So Al was not religious, but he was highly moral. He not only lived his own life well, but he lived to enhance the well-being of everyone he touched. If there's a place in the afterlife for any of us, then Al should be there.
Hi, I'm Lynne, Al's sister, and Mike was saying that I should throw in a few stories that were a little more jolly than just a farewell, but I don't think I can shift back and forth, so I'm going to save my fun stuff until everybody else gets up and tell those stories then. I've had to swim through an ocean of emotion to get to my brother Al, to remember who he was, and not drown in grief over his loss.
The sense I had in my brother throughout our growing up years was that he was quiet and unassuming fellow who loved to read. He rarely expressed or spoke. He rarely spoke up or expressed an opinion, which is pretty shocking, given that the man who just left would argue that white was black and talk you down until you begged for mercy. It could be he was making up for lost time. At any rate, his generous opinions certainly allowed me to know the man he became. He was someone I could always count on. He was a person I went to when I was scared, the keeper of my confidences. He was trustworthy, dependable, steadfast, loyal, kind, and generous. And he was also intelligent, curious, introverted, reflective, and on a perennial quest to understand the big mysteries of life. He really loved to exercise this magnificent brain of his. He could also be sarcastic, argumentative, belligerent, if he needed a little elbow room. And we all did beg for mercy when that happened. His real gift to all of us in this life was the family he created. I so admire how well he cared for his children and his grandchildren. He was an amazing father. He loved learning how to know his kids and participate in their lives. And in turn, they opened him up. His children and grandchildren enhanced who he became as a human being. They gave meaning to his life that no amount of intellectual pursuit could ever fulfill. How lucky are we to have this legacy?
All right, I've got some words from Tom as well, and Barbara. Those off. This is from Tom, Al's youngest brother. My brother Al is gone now. The thought of this is incomprehensible to me. It will take a long time to remember the lifetime of moments we shared without feeling the pain of his loss so viscerally. In starting that process, I have been gathering memories to understand just what my brother meant to me. Al was a huge presence in my life, despite our age difference. I can go back to my earliest memories and find Alan there, sitting on our bunk bed on Coles Avenue, and 12-year-old Al is teaching his 4-year-old brother how to whistle. I was thrilled to learn something that came so naturally to the rest of my family. A couple of years later, it was 16-year-old Al that was pushing me down the sidewalk on a wobbly bicycle when I found new freedom and experiencing the larger world beyond our block. Not long after this, Al gave me his old Royce Smalley baseball mitt that taught me how to catch a fastball without flinching. I had a good arm in those days, and hopefully I impressed him with a few fastballs of my own. When the Duncan yo-yo salesman would come to town, it was Al who demonstrated how to walk the dog and loop the loop and rock the cradle, all necessary cool moves to impress on the playground. Somewhere between the baseball lesson and the yo-yo, I was taught how to fashion my first offensive concealed weapon, the mighty coat hanger slingshot. To be honest, half the credit for this has to go to Bill. The damage done around town with his equalizer was entirely on me, though. I lost touch with Al for a number of years due to our ages, but when Al got out of the service, we got to live together. Just the two of us at home the winter of 1970. He had every right to despise me then for my views on the war, but he never did. We got along well, and I was grateful he was around during a very confusing time in my life. As it was, we got to drink a lot of Schlitz and watch Archie Bunker on All in the Family. A few years later, I got hooked on fishing and was able to get Al enthused about it too. We had a lot of good times together in small boats and caught a lot of fish. One fish I caught was a whopper, and I almost got it in the net, but it broke the line. When I turned to Al, who was in the rear, and tried to tell him about the monster, it quickly became a lifelong opportunity for him to pull my chain for telling fish tales. I suspect he did believe me, but would never admit it, in the spirit of true brotherly love. Later in life, Al returned the favor by getting me back on a motorcycle and joining him in his newfound passion. These are my favorite memories with him. We never had to say anything after a long day of getting lost on new roads and new areas. He could just smile and know we had just shared something special. I wish I could have taken Al on one last ride with me, but since his passing, I feel him with me every time I lean into a curve and hit the throttle. I see him leaning back, arms in the air, yelling, "Wahoo!" faster. I love and miss you, brother. Catamus. All right, this is gonna be hard. This is from Barb Sheehan. My heart, my thoughts, and my tears have gotten in the way of what I'd really like to say. Like a sad song when you told me not to listen to the words. I did it anyway, and I fell apart. I have fallen apart again, but it's in the sadness of you leaving. Throughout the years, we have always been part of each other's lives. In our teenage years, you were my first date, first kiss, first boyfriend, goosebumps and senior prom. Second time around at 53 years old, who would have thought we would be listening to Johnny Mathis and you'd be giving me those goosebumps all over again? When I told you I didn't want a boyfriend, you said, "You don't know what you're talking about." You were right, and I so want to thank you for that. I will cherish my life with you. I will cherish my life with you and all the memories we created together along the way. I know in time the memories will open up my heart, and I will be able to smile again. I will follow you into heaven with a loving heart, open arms, and tears of joy as I say to you, well, here we go again. Thank you for giving me your heart, not just once, but twice. I will love you forever, Mr. Mack. Andy?
Hey guys. First of all, thank you to everyone who came out today. Just shows how loved he was. So in the summer of 1997, my father, brother, and I left LaGrange, Illinois, and set out on an adventure. The plan was to drive very far north into the Canadian Rockies to see some of the biggest and most breathtaking mountains in the world, in Alberta and Banff National Park. From there, we would set out west to the small coastal town of Prince Rupert, where we would board a ferry and spend the next 3 days chugging through the glacial-fed waters of southeast Alaska on our way to see my sister Carrie and her new boyfriend Jason in Sitka. All right, so on a side note, Jason was somewhat of a mystery to me. Who was this man who Carrie met living in the small fishing and logging town in Alaska? What was he doing up there? What was anyone doing up there, I thought to myself at the naive age of 17. Was he an escaped con? Oh, I lost my spot. Okay, running from the law? Was he a castaway living his life on the edge of civilization? He was none of these things, but what he was and still is one of the most caring, compassionate, and thoughtful people I've ever had the honor of knowing. And our entire family is better off with him in our lives. Anyways, we camped along the way on our adventure north, stopping in national forests and parks to take pictures of the pristine lakes, rivers, and wildlife. At one of the campsites, as we were sitting around the fire, my dad did something that he had never done before. He opened his heart, and he began to tell my brother and I who he was for real as a man, as a father, and as a husband. He told us stories from his youth growing up with 5 brothers and sisters, and of his relationship with his own father. He apologized for past behaviors, and also for missteps in the way he approached his relationship with us and my mother. I was seeing a new side of my dad. From that point on, for the rest of my life, that man that spoke to me that evening around the campfire was someone new in my eyes. He had gone through a metamorphosis. It was the rebirth of Al Mack. Not long after that trip, he read the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by the author Robert M. Pirsig. Now, as many of you know, my dad had a voracious appetite for books and knowledge in general, but no single book may have had as much of an impact on the direction of his life than this one. He grew a beard, bought a motorcycle, and became a road warrior monk, or as my friends like to call him, Mad Max. He traveled the entire United States on 3 different motorcycles. He saw places that much of us will only see a fraction of, or not at all. He bought rain gear and rode his bike through thunderstorms to visit his grandchildren in California and Oregon. On one particular trip outside of Madison, Wisconsin, he had a head-on collision with a baby deer, which catapulted him off the bike and nearly threw into oncoming traffic. He walked away from that accident with some bruised ribs and scratches on his arms. The deer, well, he developed a bit of a stutter after that. Throughout all the years that he was traveling, and up until just a few months ago, I stopped in to visit with him. On the television, he was either watching a Cubs game or some type of political talking head show where the pundits were constantly talking over one another and not letting the other one finish their sentence. You know, he loved watching that stuff. He loved debate. In fact, he thrived on it. He would have made a top-notch trial lawyer. I'd sit down and we'd talk for hours about everything. He would give me advice about school, work, politics, money, girls, and ingrained into me so many life lessons that I hold on to till this very day. He was my source for answers when I had questions. He was the voice of reason when I would suggest my next, as he liked to call them, harebrained ideas. And he was the rock on which I could confide in any of my inner turmoils or anguish. That is the one thing that I will miss the most about my dad. The long talks we had and the little takeaways of knowledge that he gave me. The last thing he said to me in his final days was, "You know where you're going." I will forever cherish this and cherish this statement and always be thankful for the legacy that he left me and the rest of his children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Nora. I am Nora Allen, I guess. Al's eldest granddaughter. And I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in English class, actually. And I'm really going to try not to cry while I read it, so just bear with me. For my grandpa Ampa, who knew everything there was to know about anything, who loved Pepsi and pie, but wasn't allowed to have either. Sorry. Who hugged the tightest and kissed the slobberiest. For my grandpa Ampa, who read stories the best, but listened to stories even better. Who loved babies and bike rides and believed in the stars. For my grandpa Ampa, who gave me my mom, my uncles, and aunt, who gave me my cousins, my blue eyes, and my stubbornness. For my grandpa Ampa, who left us 3 weeks ago and has yet to give me a sign, who told me he would not be coming back, but I know that he is here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Myrna. I was one of my grandpa's grandchildren, and I just wrote a little paragraph. The first memory I have of my Ampa was riding on the back of his motorcycle. I was so young and so scared, but I held on to him as tight as possible, clenching onto his leather jacket. And I knew at that point that I was safe with him. That's the effect that he could have on you. His stubbornness could drive you mad, but his selflessness always shone through. He was the man that gave my family and I a place to stay. The man who always put family first and a man who could make me smile and laugh when all I wanted to do was sob. The man that passed away 3 weeks ago while I was sitting next to him. Last week I asked for a sign. I looked to my porch and there I saw a big, beautiful yellow butterfly. And that's when I knew he'd always be with me. He'd always be with all of us. Maybe he's a butterfly or a hawk, or maybe he's in the air around us. Nobody really knows. What I do know, however, is that my Ampa, my motorcycle grandpa, is gone, but never really gone. Always were the last words I said to him, and always is right, because he will always be my favorite guy, always be my guardian angel, and always be my motorcycle grandpa. Always.
Thanks, Nora and Myrna. You guys are a hard act to follow. Nora, there'll be a sign. There'll be a sign. Uncle Al strongly held a scientific worldview. He was also a great hugger. He really was a great hugger. I picture him grabbing me as I walk into his living room, age 14, yanking me to him and squeezing me around my shoulders and messing up my hair. I can see him holding Andy, the two of them lying on the ground together in a tent at our campsite, holding each other tight. He was a great hugger. This belief in science as a way of understanding the world, and this action of hugging as his expression of love, they both mattered to him. They both gave meaning to the world around him. Our family comes from a rich tradition of religious ritual. Important moments in life were organized by that ritual. But a scientific worldview leaves open a world of possibility for creation of new ways to act out our understanding of these moments. Al embodied that belief. He was both skeptical and open-minded. For us now, that skepticism and open-mindedness can guide us through the pain that's filling the void where he used to be. What rituals should we enact to remember him, to celebrate his life, to remember his place in our life? At Tom and Kate's last great Christmas party in Park Ridge, I remember talking to him about his father, my grandfather. Uncle Al was sitting to my right in front of the fireplace, Uncle Lee to my left, and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree in front of the room facing the street. We talked about how complex people are, but how simple the grandparent-grandchild relationship was. I loved Pruny so much. He used to take us to get ice cream and sing Hawaiian songs to us. He would tell us stories about the giant wooden man, and he made up the whole world as he went. Michael and Gage, Nora and Owen, Myrna and Ethan, Kevin, Ryan, and Emmett. Your grandfather held a belief about the world that's open to many possibilities for the creation of understanding about how to be with him now, about how you can continue to bring him into your life. Think about his voice, how he said your name, how he held you tight to him. Talk to him if you want to. Ask him questions and tell him how you are doing. You'll need to tell Bowie and Ellie about who he was. One way you can make ritual to keep him close is to think about some specific times you spent with him. If you want, write them down now so you can remember them later. Imagine the details of the space and what he said to you. Remember him on his birthday, August 10th. And I have a poem written by Marie Howe for the physicist Stephen Hawking when he died in March of this year. I think Al would enjoy. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity we once were? So compact nobody needed a bed or food or money, nobody hiding in the school bathroom or home alone pulling the drawer where the pills are kept open. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Remember? There was no nature, no them, No test to determine if the elephant grieves their calf or if the coral reef feels pain. Trashed oceans don't speak English or Farsi or French. Would that we could wake up to what we were when we were ocean. And before that, to when sky was earth and animal was energy, and rock was liquid and stars were space and space was not at all, nothing. Before we came to believe humans were so important, before this awful loneliness, can molecules recall it? What once was, before anything happened? No I, no we, no one, no was, no verb, no noun, only a tiny, tiny dot brimming with is, all, everything, home.
Michael, I'm over here.
I can hold it. Ooh, that's loud. Hi there. What I'm about to read is something that I wrote last year. It's actually the first draft of my college application essay. And in the essay, I was asked to discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of myself or others. Given that prompt, I decided to focus on Appa and the effect that he had on me when I was young. But when my English teacher read it, he said that it sounded like I wanted Appa to get into college and not myself. So I had to rewrite it and focus less on him and more on my own achievements. I think this rough draft accurately portrays how much I respect him and how much he did for me. But keep in mind that it's a rough draft because I was going through it this morning like, wow, this is horrible. Did some edits for you guys. Okay, so here goes. On Friday nights, at my own request, I used to sleep at my grandfather's house. We made it a weekly event to read to each other, mostly him to me, and we burnt through stacks of books this way. Everything we read was for children, but because it was my grandfather who picked the books, they never disappointed. We read under lamps late at night on a dark leather couch that was especially welcoming to fall asleep on. So every week we would have to recap the last few pages to make sure I'd been awake. At the end of the night, I would go to bed and he would stay awake reading something literary, something more suitable for an adult. Everything we read, though, was for children. This period of my life defined the way I am as a student. It was there with him that I learned the true value of an education. To my grandfather, knowledge is something that should be sought out, and learning is not just for the classroom. Over time, he revealed to me that he is self-taught in subjects such as physics, astronomy, and piano. I know there are plenty I haven't learned about, they just haven't worked their way into conversation yet. Seeing how intellectually rich he is, and growing to respect him greatly for it, I have applied the same philosophy to my life. To get something real and worthwhile out of school, you must give all your effort to it. You must hold yourself accountable for your own education. He taught me that knowledge is not something that's handed out to be absorbed, but it's offered up for the taking. My grandfather made it abundantly clear to me that the key to success is not going through the motions, but seeking out ways to advance yourself on your own accord. And I consider myself extremely lucky to have learned this at such a young age. I also consider myself lucky to have someone who would take the time to teach me. Eventually I stopped sleeping there and we stopped reading together, but I'll never take it for granted. Along with teaching me the value of pursuing knowledge, he taught me the value of sharing it. When I was young, it was hard for me to understand the significance of him devoting an entire night to spend time with me. I had no frame of reference. I never thought that stories about Peter Pan and Harry Potter might not have been groundbreaking material for an adult in his 60s. I also did not consider what important things he might have been putting aside to give me his undivided attention, when all I could offer was the company of a 10-year-old. He made me a better student than I would have been without him, and he certainly made me a better reader, but he did this while creating a bond between us that I consider more important than anything else he has given me. Now I understand that although he gave me his time, he never considered it time wasted. The love and respect that I received from him is something that I will cherish forever, and something that I hope to pass on one day in the same way. I thought that essay was especially fitting because the last conversation I had with him, well, he was very sick, and it was really hard for him to speak. But I was sitting there in bed with him, and I was like, this is kind of like our sleepovers. And I don't know what exactly that did to him, but it got him talking again. And he told me that he had never told me how much that meant to him. And that just kind of blew my mind. I don't really know how someone could be so selfless, but someday, through life experience, I hope to figure it out. Thanks.
All right. Well, I think, unless somebody else has something to say, I think that probably concludes readings. We've been out here a little while. It's hot. Let's get something to drink and keep telling stories about Al. Thanks, everybody.